Today, there are over 50 countries around the world which continue to use the death penalty. Individuals who break the law can face a firing squad in China, lethal injection in the USA, and the hangman's noose in Singapore. It is only a decade since capital punishment was finally removed from British law. For centuries, states carried out executions, and capital punishment was defended as a deterrent against crime, retribution against those who broke society's rules.
The noose would be put over their neck, a hood put over their head, and the cart would drive away, leaving them to dangle and to gradually, slowly, up to 30 minutes, to strangle to death.
For over 200 years, a moral battle raged about whether the state has the right to execute. A powerful liberal elite emerged, determined to abolish the death penalty.
The death penalty is inhuman and degrading when you see how it is carried out and the procedures that are necessary.
But the vast majority of public opinion has continued to demand the ultimate punishment.
There are certain sorts of murder that are so premeditated, so violent, and so shocking that in the interest of maintaining confidence in the rule of law, the only appropriate punishment is the death penalty.
This debate has shaped our ideas about how a civilized society should punish its citizens in the 21st century.
The word punishment comes from the same root as pain. It is, in its essential conception, painful. If it is not painful, it is not punishment.
Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank you all for coming. Today, as a group, we will be discussing the harshest penalty allowed by the courts here in the United States. This practice is known as capital punishment, or as some may call it, the death penalty. For those of you who are unaware, the death penalty is the legal process where a person is put to death by the state as a punishment for a severe crime. Since the year 1976, over 1,300 people have been put to death by the hands of our justice system. This includes the 30 executed this year, 2014 as well. Today, only 32 out of the 50 states in our country utilize the death penalty. It seems that our nation is never at one mind when it comes to capital punishment. However, one thing is for certain. No matter who you are or where you're from, you stand on one side of this argument. We are all the people of this nation, and there is evil in this world. Is it up to us to control it? The purpose of our panel today is to hear both sides of this debate on whether the death penalty is just or unreasonable. Today we ask, are murderers unworthy of living among us? What flaws exist in our justice system today? Is the death penalty the only punishment acceptable for some of the monstrous crimes committed today? Or is it just a temporary escape to a permanent problem in our country? In just a moment, I will open up the floor to our panelists. They will touch base with you, sharing their opinions on the death penalty with supporting facts. Right after their introduction, I'll begin to ask a series of questions to the panel. And last but not least, I will open the floor to the audience for any questions or thoughts you have about the discussion. To my left, we have these three people for capital punishment. Ian Bajima, one of our nation's finest FBI criminal profilers. We have Victoria Rizzo, a journalist for the New York Times, and Gregory Geltz, a criminal professor here at Buff State. To my right, we have Quentin Steffen, a philosopher of politics and a human rights activist, and Eric Deskowitz, a defense attorney. Okay, Ian, we'd like to hear from you first.
My name is Ian Bajima. I'm in favor of one of the most controversial issues within the criminal justice system that we all deal with today. My focus is on the morality of the justice and reinforcing this justice. I invite you to listen to a short story about a man who has motivated me to support the death penalty. His name is Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, also known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. He is an American serial killer who murdered 17 men and boys between the years of 1978 and 1991. Every murder involved rape, necrophilia, dismemberment, and cannibalism. By the summer of 1991, Dahmer was murdering approximately one person per week. He got the idea that he could turn his victims into zombies, completely submissive, eternally youthful sexual partners, and attempted to do so by drilling holes into their skulls and injecting hydrochloric acid and boiling water into the frontal lobe area of their brains with a large syringe, usually while the victim was still alive. During the arrest of Dahmer, the searching of the apartments revealed 3 more severed heads, multiple photographs of murdered victims and human remains, severed hands and penises, along with photographs of dismembered victims and human remains in his refrigerator. He was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms, or a total of 957 years in prison. Is it fair that this man got free clothing, shelter, food, and water for the rest of his life, while all his other victims did not get to choose their fate? One of the strongest arguments that oppose the death penalty is that the cost of the death penalty is too much. I invite you to compare the cost of the death penalty to the cost of insurance, just as you would have for a car or a house. You pay extra for the service, but ultimately the service gives you comfort and a peace of mind knowing that your back is ultimately covered. The same idea can be applied to the death penalty in a way that you are paying extra, but it ensures you no further crime will be committed, a peace of mind and comfort. We're talking about a very serious punishment for a very serious crime. Just remember that with whatever justice system is in play, it will always need refinement. Let's not irrationally abolish this penalty just because some parts of it needs revision. In closing, I would like to submit a couple facts for your consideration. In the United States, according to the BBC, who published an article in January of 2012, slightly greater than 53% of convicted murderers who are paroled have killed again. According to the Economic Policy Journal in 2010, the total number of people who have murdered was 12,996, slightly under 13,000. If 25% of those people, the 13,000, were paroled, we're putting a potential 1,600 innocent lives in needless danger, which could have easily been prevented. As a society, we are more concerned about tending to the needs of the convicted criminal murderer than protecting the innocent people that they will kill with their repeat offense. Thank you.
All right, Victoria, we'll hear from you.
Hi, my name is Victoria Rizzo, and I am in favor of the death penalty. In today's society, the term death penalty stirs up a lot of controversy and emotions. Capital punishment is a polarizing topic with 2 basic viewpoints. Some may say that some crimes are so evil that the perpetrator deserves to die, while others see it as barbaric and against American values. My argument in regards to this topic is that it can provide a safer environment for us. It's preventing one criminal from repeating the same crime, while saving society the fear and anxiety of wondering if that criminal will ever be released on parole. According to the Gallup Poll Crime Survey, Americans favor the use of capital punishment for murders by 64% to 30%. Many of those who favor the death penalty believe it is an eye for an eye. If someone you knew was killed, I am almost sure you would want their murderer to pay for what they have done. Republicans are the biggest supporters of capital punishment, but vast majorities of independent voters and over 50% of Democrats support it as well. Without capital punishment, our lives are less secure and crimes of violence do increase. Thank you.
All right, and we'll have Gregory.
Hello, thank you for having me. The story of the death penalty is measured in one predictable way: lives and death. I can assure you that over on the other side of the panel, my fellow panelists feel the same way. Life and death are the simplest ways we can use to tackle such a large issue. However, the tables are not the only thing between us. The stand I take is different from theirs, and perhaps different from yours, but please, hear me loud and clear. The death penalty must not be abolished. This is how we as a society restore equilibrium, put a value on life. Here are some facts. Ted Bundy murdered over 30 women and is possibly responsible for more than 100 total deaths. His last victim in 1978 was a 12-year-old girl named Kimberly Leach. Her decomposed body was found under a hog shed. Her body was ravaged by her murderer and again by vermin, maggots, and small animals. She had been violated and beaten. A doctor at the trial said her arms were twisted in an almost unnatural way, and she most likely died during the rape. I repeat, 12 years old, raped, murdered, dead, buried like trash. So I asked you to look inside yourself. When Ted Bundy died in the electric chair, was this a mistake? Was it cruel? Was it unusual? Was it not the absolute right thing to do? Didn't Ted Bundy deserve to die? Perhaps this line of questioning veers too closely to moral opinion, but the fact remains, no amount of electricity can bring back any of those hundreds of lives back. But I say to you, the volts that coursed through his body that day stood for something. Without that symbolism, justice is lost. The value of stolen lives, and perhaps even ours, are dishonored when those that murdered are allowed to live. Ted Bundy didn't give his victims the benefit of life, so why should he or any other murderer be afforded the same? As Jonah Goldberg of the National Review said, why is the death penalty an issue when uncertainty isn't? Why must opponents of the death penalty cherry-pick the innocence of a few unfortunate souls to build their case around? Goldberg said that no transitive property yet exists in a way that opponents want it to work. How can you say that one heinous murderer is less deserving of death just because another person was exonerated of a murder? I bring you back to the question I asked earlier. Did Ted Bundy deserve to die? Did he deserve to live? Perhaps you could ask Kimberly Leach.
Thank you, Greg. Now we will hear from this side of the panel. All right, Quentin.
All right. Hello, my name is Quentin Stephan, and I'm a philosopher of politics. At birth, we are all born humans. At death, we all die human. How is it fair to say that one may suffer the ultimate consequence of death, and others may not? We are given human rights from the start of our lives until the end of it. We are all human. The Eighth Amendment right given to us by the United States Constitution says excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. And also, as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says under Article 22, everyone is entitled to realization of the economic, social, and cultural rights indispensable for his or her dignity. The way and games we play on people's lives also impact their state of mental health as well. Knowing you are going to die, and you are going to die in a specific date and even time, brings most people on death row to insanity, as well as they are put in this position because many of them could not afford their own lawyer. One was appointed to them. There are very low-class lawyers here, and because of this, these criminals have no good case in trial supporting their own defense. There's a lot of gray area between here on the death penalty, and is a permanent solution to one's own life. However, whether they deserve it or not, life in prison is cheaper and more humane than justifying killing with more killing. In a civil society, and the death penalty is morally wrong and serves as a means to an ultimate end. But life in prison, without the chance of parole, justifies it as well. They will die in their own parameters, more humanely, because we, at no point in our lives, change from a human being. It is impossible. Justice can be captivated and excreted in good ways, but nothing makes sense with justice being taken upon the criminal with death. As Gandhi once said, an eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind. Do you really want to live in a civil society and know that justice is being served with more deaths? There is enough killing in this world as is, but it does not have to continue in the prisons in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you, Quentin. All right, we'll hear from you, Eric.
As much as we would like to believe it to be so, the justice system is not infallible. By nature, all humans make mistakes, and all people are capable of being corrupt. It is because of this natural fallibility and the inherent flaws in the justice system that I firmly believe that the death penalty is unfair and ultimately unjust. Since 1973, over 140 people have been released from death row in the United States following evidence of their wrongful conviction. Any institution that has the authority to take human life while maintaining the potential to be inaccurate is ultimately unjust and irresponsible. Because of the fact that so many people have been found innocent while on death row, it can be assumed that innocent people have been executed by the American justice system. The hands of the system are stained with innocent blood. The potential killing of even one innocent person is cause enough to throw away the entire practice. The fact that the institution of execution has the potential to take innocent life means that it has no place in a just and civilized society. There is no potential for a perfect and infallible justice system. By our very nature, we make mistakes, and I believe that because of this, the death penalty is irresponsible. The vast majority of death row inmates were incapable of affording their own lawyer and were forced to use a court-appointed one, who, unfortunately, was more often than not completely unqualified to handle the case. This is a grave injustice and perpetuates an inherent unfairness of those of low income. If every single convict is not guaranteed absolutely equal quality legal representation, then the justice system has no place deciding whether that individual gets to live or die. Because of the unavoidable possibility of corruption within the justice system, it is morally responsible to abolish the death penalty in order to avoid abuses and the spilling of innocent blood. Thank you.
Eric. Okay, so I would like to start my first question, this is to everyone. What is justice in relation to the death penalty? I'll start off again with you, Ian.
In my opinion, justice in relation to the death penalty is correcting the wrongdoing and simply equalizing the balance. When equilibrium is broken, it requires another action to offset this wrongdoing. Depending on how violent and heinous the crime is, that's to the court. This should not be to the expense of society. When someone is sentenced to life imprisonment, it then becomes society's responsibility to care for them. That is unjust. When you violate society by removing someone against their will, i.e. murder, you lose your place in society. That's just, and that's my opinion, but that's just.
Okay, thank you. Victoria?
I think the best definition of justice is fair treatment to people. Justice is the most important part of a system of government. It is what keeps the rights of people from being ignored by people in power with motives. If a life is taken, then the murderer must suffer the same fate. This is justice, a punishment equal to the crime that was committed.
All right, Greg, can we hear from you?
When we think about justice as blind and with scales. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the only thing that can balance out death? And I think absolutely death is the only thing that will balance out death. If we go back to the video that we watched, that the moderator or the person in charge of the video there doing the narration, he was from England, and England hasn't had executions for 50 years, and yet the rate for people that support the death penalty is still pretty high. It's 45%. Up until 2 years ago, it was 51%. So I think there's a part of us inside, whether it's, you're from one country, another, that we all feel that certain things they're the right thing to do. They pass the smell test. You hit me on the playground, I hit you back. I think that when it comes to the death penalty, certain leaders of countries, they might think they're acting in the best interest of public safety, but they're insulated from public opinion. They don't realize that the majority of people, majority of Americans, 63%, 64%, they believe in the death penalty. They think it's the absolute right thing to do. So when you abolish the death penalty, and after 50 years it only drops to a small minority that support it, I think that tells you that the death penalty is the absolute right thing to do in cases of murder.
Correct.
All right, Quentin, let's hear from you.
All right. You can't change the definition of justice because of one's own murder, even though it is controversial, especially through the justice system. I believe that justice is being served out with these people being sent to jail, but I don't think it should be justified with death as well. I feel like they are doing their time, and even if they are in there for life without parole for the crimes that they committed, is fair. And I believe that death really isn't the real motive and solution that we want in a civil society today. Thank you.
Justice is the administration of law and punishment in a fair and impartial manner in accordance to society's values. The application of justice should be free of prejudice, bias, misinformation, malice, alternative motives, and abuse. But unfortunately, there is no such thing as a pure institution. and it is very naive to harbor the idea that such a thing is possible. And as such, those who are facing punishment should be protected from excessive or cruel punishment, and this includes the taking of life.
Thank you, Eric. I'd like to propose my second question. Is death a just punishment for murder? Or does it put out the statement, violence is the solution to a problem?
I'll start that off and say yes, plain and simple. Going back to Greg's example in his opening statement with Ted Bundy and 12-year-old Kimberly Leach, why should any murderer be granted the time of life when their victims weren't and had no say in the decision? How is it fair and just that they can continue with their life when they made the decision to end somebody else's life? It just doesn't seem logical.
So you do think that in some cases, violence is the best solution to problems?
Yes, oh yes, especially with the most extreme cases, which we are bringing out today.
Okay, all right. Let's hear from you, Greg.
I would say absolutely. You can't cherry pick. You can't cherry pick these things and say, well, death is only needed in certain cases or certain instances. I think the Gallup poll that just came out said that 64% of people think either the death penalty isn't meted out enough or it's just right. So the support for the death penalty is there. If you look at examples of crimes that victims have done, that people have committed, like the Menendez brothers in 1989, they killed both of their parents. Shotgun blast back to the back of the head of their father. The mother slipped on blood, and as she ran away, they shot her numerous times, leaving her almost unrecognizable. And yet, they got life in prison, and so they were able to marry in prison. They were able to have 2 hots and a cot. They were able to see sunlight through their jail cell. They were able to have a meal. Nothing. All these things they were not afforded to their parents. They weren't afforded to other victims of crime, of murders and things like that. So I wouldn't call it necessarily violence. If you say that it's violence, you're saying that it's unjustified. It's absolutely justified.
Okay. Well, killing is violence. Like, I'll just put that out there. But let's hear from you, Quentin. Is death a just punishment for murder? Do you feel like us as a nation killing people that puts out the statement that violence is the solution to a problem? What do you think about that?
I don't think violence is any solution to any problem that's been given violence. I believe that the ways in the death penalty are carried out are absolutely out of date, and they're cruel and unacceptable. And from a psychological standpoint, the French writer Albert Camus also contended that the convict awaiting death at a certain date suffers from devastating and immeasurable psychological effects more than his victim did. So I believe that life in prison really is a just and fair reasoning, and it isn't violent. The things that are carried out in prisons between inmates, they are violent, but ultimately to tell someone from a justice system saying that they are going to die on a specific date, I believe that is very cruel and very, very unacceptable.
Okay, let's hear from you, Eric.
Solving violence with violence, I personally feel, is childish. After a while, it becomes little more than vigilante justice, akin to that in the Old West, and I think if it's left intact, it truly can become dangerous. In my opinion, it's little more than a tool for revenge. It just sates the bloodlust of mourning families, and while I agree that, well, maybe that's not what I'm really saying, but with those mourning families, I sympathize with them, but I don't feel that the spilling blood solves any of their issues. The principle it's based off the archaic principle of an eye for an eye, which in concept, it has no real place in a civilized society, and in practice has the potential to tear the country to shreds. Punishment should be fair, responsible, and should be enacted in a way that does not stain the honor of our justice system. The second the court declares that a man's life is now forfeit, it becomes a murderer. The forced extinguishing of life, by definition, is murder. Execution is murder in the name of ideology disguised as justice.
Wow. Thank you, Eric. I want to direct this question to Victoria. Does the death penalty prevent people from committing murder? Do you think?
I think that most murders happen, I think it's spur of the moment. I think that the death penalty isn't a deterrent because most people who do commit murders do not expect to be caught or do not carefully weigh the differences between a possible execution and life in prison before they act. But according to the National Research Council, a new report in 2012 was released after surveying all the academic literature, looking at every study that investigated the issue of crime rates and capital punishment. But what they did conclude was that there was no reliable research on whether the death penalty has any effect on murder rate. There is no credible evidence. But I also think that the death penalty is not about deterring crime.
Okay, thank you. Let's hear from you, Greg.
Okay, so I think that the death penalty, it's not about deterring crime, as my colleague here had said. So in the Gallup poll that they just had, they said, why do you support the death penalty? Only 6% of people said, yes, it's about deterring crime. How can you deter a person from a crime when they haven't committed it yet? And are you going to do so by killing a person just to stop them from doing something they haven't done? I think that capital punishment isn't about deterring crime. It's about solving the imbalance that we have in society by having a murderer be alive after some heinous crimes that they've committed. John Wayne Gacy, 33 convicted murderers. There are convictions of murdered teens, sexual assault of them. So we have said to society, okay, this is not right. This is what we have done. It wouldn't be the same to put him in jail for the rest of his life when armed burglary and armed robbery and things like these, they carry a life sentence as well. So are you saying that these are equivalent? I don't understand that argument that murder is equivalent to any other crime, a life sentence, 3 strikes law. Murder should be followed by death.
Okay. All right. Let's hear from you, Ian.
I actually, on the other hand, I do believe that it is somewhat of a deterrence. According to Equal Justice USA, they stated in an article that if you think of it like this, without the potential for a death sentence, there is no incentive for a murderer on the run not to continue killing, or a convicted murderer to continue killing within the confines of a prison, or even one who is waiting for trial to begin killing witnesses and such. This logic is equal to giving a reward to a child to stop misbehaving rather than punishing the child to making them accountable for their consequences of the bad behavior. So I feel like it is a deterrent. It's just not so much in the, I want to say in the real world versus the world of prison.
Okay.
But that's where I stand.
Okay. Thank you. Let's hear from you guys over here. Quentin?
Okay. I believe that it doesn't deter people from murdering other people or even breaking laws. I feel that people will do what they want to do. They're given free will, and they really just carry out throughout the day with what they want to do. And if they're mad, upset, doing something, and they kill somebody, I mean, that's their own choice. And I don't think they're looking for a punishment after that. I believe that they're just getting something off their chest or just getting something done. I don't really think it deters people from murder at all. It's going to happen, and it's been happening for centuries. And I just believe that nothing can really deter someone from even doing anything, even if it is illegal.
Eric?
And there's really no evidence that I have ever seen that shows that the death penalty decreases murder rates. In fact, in my research, I've noticed the opposite. States that actually have the death penalty are more prone to having a higher murder rate than states that don't. And, yeah.
Okay.
May I make a comment on that?
Yeah, sure.
So with that fact there, I think you're putting the horse before the cart. How can you effectively correlate a murder rate with the death penalty, saying people, for me, it seems like you're saying that people are killing because of the death penalty. I don't understand. Maybe the death penalty is that state's solution through their sovereign right to have the death penalty in response to this murder problem that they have.
Well, the death penalty, it's like even written out, like in facts, in numbers, that it's not a deterrent. Like, it's not having any real effect on society. It's not scaring people away from killing other people. As long as there are laws, people will break them regardless of the consequences.
Okay. I have just a little side comment after hearing what you guys said. Do you think that the death penalty, since it does differ from state to state, that deters people from, moving to a certain state because they know that the death penalty is, in fact, executed in that state? Do you think at all? That's just a random question.
I wouldn't say that crosses a person's mind when they commit themselves to committing murder. I think that unjust actions know no political boundaries. They don't, people don't say, they might move for tax purposes, but they're not going to move for murder.
Thank you for that, Gregory. I'm going to move on to the next question. Is life in prison equivalent to being executed? I know we spoke about this a little bit, but let's just hear. Oh, I actually want to hear from you, Quentin. What do you have to say about that?
Okay. Well, under Article 5, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. I believe that life in prison is a good way of getting that person out of civil society and into the prisons where they're pretty much held in a cage, and if it's for the rest of their life without parole, I believe that it's a justifying factor that will definitely keep them off the streets and keep the streets safe. However, people who are brought to these, they can't afford the lawyer, so one's appointed to them. And so when that happens, their trial isn't exactly fair. They don't have a lawyer to really have that defense for them. And that's why a lot of the times people who can afford a lawyer don't necessarily get the death penalty, but people who can't afford a lawyer do get the death penalty, only because they don't have a good defense attorney on their side.
Okay. And I believe that life in prison is spiritually worse than being put to death. It's the forced halting of life, and the accused's life is forcefully put on hold, and the convict essentially begins to exist in a state of living decay. The prisoner is forced to live with and be reminded of their mistake every single day of their life. They're haunted by it, and their crime becomes like a ghost. In a way, I feel it is more cruel than death. In fact, I personally think that the punishment of solitary confinement is the worst possible punishment that can be delivered onto a person. I think that should be more widely used in the American justice system in replacing the death penalty, because it destroys the mind and the soul, but maintains the life. And that, you're living in a void. You're living in an eternal purgatory. You wish you were dead, but you're not. You're living in emptiness. And that, I feel, is far worse than just it all going away in an instant.
So do you feel like our nation takes the easy way out by just simply putting these people to death?
I do. I think it's a quick fix. It's like putting a patch on a dam that's breaking. That's all it's really doing.
Thank you, Eric. Okay, Victoria, please.
So you're going to say that getting fed 3 meals a day, a roof over your head, a bed to sleep on, and some activities are... Because I was going to say this is more of many of the hungry and homeless get in today's society. That's the way I kind of look at it. But I'm not convinced that some people say that death is different. Some people say that the death penalty is crueler than life in prison. I don't agree with that. I think that the death penalty is at one end of the spectrum of punishments. I think that punishment in some cases is its own justification for very bad actions. And in those cases, the ultimate punishment is appropriate. People fear death. People do not fear life, and life is valued more than death is. People who are convicted of capital offenses never opt for the death penalty because they always plea bargain for life in prison because it's natural, it's human nature. Also, according to David Schaefer, a PhD professor of political science at Holy Cross College, anti-death penalty groups know, of course, that there is no guarantee that a sentence of life without parole will actually be followed, and potential killers likely know it too.
That's where I have to agree with her, and ask you the question: is it fair they get to sit in prison 3 meals a day, shower, sleep, medical care, shelter? And back to what Greg said before with the 2 brothers who actually married and in jail. Is that fair? I don't see how that can be more cruel than death.
Well, if I may speak,
Yeah.
if you look at it from a prison standpoint, in prisons there's a lot of rape going on and a lot of mistreatment of the guards, and the food isn't that great, things like that. I mean, they're not living pristine lives in prison. They're given everything they need just to survive, and the things that go on in prison, you're in there for life, and it's kind of like their own society, and it's really kind of messed up on how things work there. And I think that that's more just to have them live in their own hell than rather just being executed. I believe that being executed is definitely the easy way out, and it's just that quick fix that Eric was talking about.
Thank you. Oh yeah, please.
So, both of you brought up good points, but you said they don't live pristine lives in prison, but the fact remains they live. They live where their victim, their victim goes on in memory only. You spoke about, they live in a void being in solitary confinement. Well, what about the people that don't live and they're in a void? So there's so much focus here that on the murderer, when we lose when the focus goes off of the acts that they've done and the people that they've killed, I feel like that is just, that to me that's patently offensive. I have a quote here from Margaret Thatcher, and she says, "I personally have always voted for the death penalty because I believe that people who go on to prepared to take the lives of others forfeit their own right to live. I believe that the death penalty should be used only very rarely, but I believe that no one should go on certain, no matter how cruel, how vicious, how hideous their time, how hideous their murder, they themselves will not suffer the death penalty. If you're not prepared to do the time, no matter how short, from life in prison to your death row to the hangman's noose or whatever it may be, don't do the crime."
Do you have anything to say to that, Quentin? Or?
I just believe that life in prison would be worse. They're not really living. It's kind of an artificial life. They're given their life to live, but at the same time, they can't really do anything, no really seeing anybody. Maybe they have no family, things like that. They wish they'd be dead. And I believe that having them live, having them think about what they did, having them have that realization of, oh my gosh, like I killed somebody and now I have an aggravating offense, maybe I robbed a bank, and now I'm in prison for life. I'm not going to live that free life that I once had. I don't have those choices. I can't do anything. I'm just stuck in a prison, nothing to do, just trying to get by.
Can I ask you a question, Quentin? This is just directed to you after what you just said. How would you define life?
I believe life is just a spirited, free will experience, and it's just altered by all the decisions you make. And depending on those decisions, lead you to different places, different roads. You may not know the roads that you're going down, but they all lead somewhere. And I believe that the choices that you make in the life that you're living, a free, spirited life, you have the freedom to do whatever. From the moment of birth to death, you're given a time to be here. And the choices that you make only deter you to do things and want you to succeed in life or, unfortunately, end up in life in prison.
Thank you. This question is going to be directed to the pro side. Earlier, Quentin and Eric both quoted Mahatma Gandhi, "An eye for an eye leaves the world blind." I just want to ask you, how do you feel about this quote? Any of you, just opinion.
I feel like that you need to put, you can't look at it as general as that quote is, and you kind of need to look at it circumstantially. And when it is as cruel of a crime, then yes, I agree, an eye for an eye. Yeah, that's how I feel.
I wouldn't base a system of justice off of a quote, off of a proverb. I think you have to look at justice and the death penalty in as far as society correcting its wrongs, and if we're blind, as it says, then we're all screwed. And I don't believe that for 1 minute, and I don't believe that the death penalty is morally wrong. I think 61% of Americans don't believe that the death penalty is morally wrong. So I think Mahatma Gandhi, he had a place and a time to say that statement, but it wasn't here in America, and it wasn't about the death penalty.
Okay. I only asked because you guys have been, speaking about, what just balancing out. So, do you guys have anything to say about what they just said, or should I move on to the next question?
I feel the eye for an eye concept just it recommends constant retribution for any wrong done to you, and I think that just doesn't seem on par with a structured justice system to me. I think a lot of time. I don't really know where I'm going with this at the moment.
Take your time.
Quentin, do you have anything to add for the moment?
An eye for an eye leaves the whole world blind. I believe that it's a just way of saying that if you do the crime, you do the time. But at the same time, you're not going to justify killing with more killing. What's really the reason behind that? You're just killing another person that's killed one person, maybe multiple people, and you're just ending their life sooner. And I believe that life in prison really is a just way of actually living out their life in their own how. It's their way of, actually realizing what they've done and actually maybe being sorrowful about it. And maybe in the next life, things might happen. They might actually have repented for their sins and things like that. But at the same time, though, you can't just justify killing with more killing. It just brings us to an uncivil society.
Thank you, Quentin. In this debate, we've been going back and forth. I just want to hear some opinions on why is the death penalty so controversial in America, in the UK, everywhere. Like, why is this such a controversial topic? We can start off with you guys over here.
I would say that the death penalty is controversial because it appeals to our moral sensibilities. I think around the world people have this instinct that says, you do wrong to me and I will have my revenge. Now necessarily death penalty isn't revenge, but it is the resetting of certain things that have been wrong. These say eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. Well, not everybody in this world takes an eye. But if we use the two that we have, we'll see that we're only affecting the people that have committed a crime. It's not something that affects everybody on a personal basis. The death penalty doesn't affect me in the same way that it affects somebody who's had a family member murdered. It doesn't affect me the same way that a person on death row it would. But at the same time, I still have these instincts inside of me that tell me whether or not something's right or wrong.
All right.
Okay.
I agree.
I strongly agree with you. I think it's controversial because it's driven by emotional responses too, like he said, and revenge mainly, and sometimes the concern for human rights. Different people, nations, religions have different opinions regarding capital punishment. I think a lot of people tend to look at the errors that have been made in past situations with innocent people being executed, so they look at that too. Then there's just also people that will always maintain their opinion that killing is wrong no matter what.
Okay, thank you, Victoria.
They said it right on. I agree. Since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976, 1,389 convicted murderers have been executed, and in that same time there has been 146 exonerations, and if you do the math, that's less than 0.5%. And ultimately, I feel like if you say you don't believe in it, you're taking the side with the criminals. It's less than 1%. It's less than 0.5%, and I don't see the equivalent grounds on that.
All right, so back to you guys. Why is the death penalty so controversial worldwide?
The death penalty is controversial because the gist of it is it's murder. It's the courts, it's the government killing its own citizens, and these are the structures that are designed to protect us from each other and from the higher power of the government itself. This is the justice system killing people, and that I feel is what makes it controversial. Anything where blood is spilled will cause a lot of debate and a lot of issues, and I don't know. I just think that the whole system as a whole doesn't work. It doesn't fit the values of America. That's just my take on it.
Eric, so I want to ask you a question. You here are a defense attorney, so I know you've seen a lot as far as different cases and such. Do errors in the justice system mean that the death penalty should be abolished? Do you know of such errors in the justice system?
Absolutely. The fact that innocent people have been put on death row, that innocent people have been executed, and the mentally ill have been executed prove that the system isn't working and it has to be abolished. There are countless false imprisonments every single year in the United States, and to place the power of life and death in the hands of a system that makes so many mistakes is irresponsible and honestly asinine. Since 1973, 142 innocent people have been released from death row following evidence of their wrongful imprisonment. This means that 142 people have had their lives saved from the ever-hungry jaws of capital punishment. Of these cases, only a handful were exonerated due to DNA testing, and a large majority were found innocent due to evidence that was withheld in court by the police, and they were released when that evidence was finally brought to light. And that proves that there's corruption in our beloved justice system. I believe that the numbers speak for themselves. It is impossible to allow a state-mandated expulsion of life. I do not believe it is possible to create a flawless justice system, and as such, society should be protected from its potential errors by removing its ability to kill.
Thank you, Eric. Can I just hear a brief statement just about what Eric said? Just how you feel about it, or a response?
I believe that there's errors in every system and no system is flawless, and if an error is going to occur, it has to be on the side of protecting society and not protecting the criminal. It's unfair to give the criminal greater consideration than you give to the family and the innocent society. Like I said before, with the 0.5% of exonerations, it's just I find it so troubling to side with the criminals when I don't know. It troubles me.
Okay.
However, since there are errors in the justice system, and this is talking about a person's life hanging in the balance, I believe that it should be abolished only because those errors also cause other troubles. People have been brought to light through DNA testing and through evidence found that was withheld in court, like Eric said. But at the same time, a person's life is at stake, and it's a very important thing because once they're gone, you can't bring them back. And if they were innocent, who's to prove until after they're dead? So.
Thank you.
I would like to make a statement.
Oh, please.
I don't think it should be embellished because I just think in certain cases punishment is appropriate for serious crimes, and for very serious crimes, like I said earlier, the ultimate punishment, death penalty, is appropriate. Should vandalism be execution worthy? No, that's unnecessary, but should mass murderers and rapists who are insane and cannot contribute positively to society and threaten other people be executed? Absolutely. I saw a statistic according to the University of Colorado. For every one person executed, 5 innocent lives are saved. If we abolish the death penalty, how will we deal with mass murders or such shooters as the Sandy Hook Elementary and the Colorado movie theater shooting? DNA testing, I would like to make a point about that. DNA testing and other methods of modern crime scene science can now effectively eliminate almost all uncertainty as to a person's guilt or innocence. It's a powerful tool for discovering the truth for these crimes. If you can test it and there's proof, then there's no excuse, and it is also 99% effective. If the death penalty or capital punishment is banned, then these crimes which are happening now will never stop.
Thank you, Victoria. And for my last question, I'm just going to ask you all to just keep it brief. According to a poll done by the ABC News, 52% of Americans prefer life with parole as punishment over that of 42% for the death penalty. This is the first time in history that this poll found higher support in life without parole. I just want to ask, where do you see this conversation or this debate in the next 20 years? Do you believe the death penalty will still be around, or do you think that we will go into another state that we did in 1976, where we put a hold on the death penalty? Just a brief, short statement about that. I'm going to start off with you, Eric.
Well, just by the numbers, it shows that people against the death penalty are increasing, and I think in 20 years' time, if the death penalty is still practiced, I can just see that number growing higher and higher until eventually it is abolished.
Thank you. Quentin.
I believe that in 20 years from now, the death penalty, it may or may not be prevalent in our society today, but at the same time, though, things are changing. Younger generations are growing up, and they're coming to realize more human rights and things that are given to us, given by life, is very precious and indeed, and life in prison would definitely be a better bet instead of just giving someone off to death.
Thank you, Quentin. Ian.
Capital punishment will always be here. It'll never go away. To deal with the worst people, you need the worst punishment, and I will forever support it.
Thank you, Ian. Victoria.
I don't know what it's going to be like in 20 years, to be honest. I feel like they may just come out with something completely different and that we don't know about.
Great.
I would say in 20 years, there's going to be some definite changes. What some of those are, I don't know. However, I do know right now there's a problem with acquiring the drugs needed for lethal injection, and 65% of Americans, they approve of lethal injection as the main method of execution. So if it takes a man in Oklahoma almost 3 hours to die, if these drugs can't get to us from the European Union because they're not being able to be sent over here because these countries are saying you can't help aid a murder, you can't help aid the death penalty, or whatever their laws might be in Europe, I think that's going to be a telling factor in the next few years. Where it ends up, ultimately, my gut reaction is that we'll still have the death penalty in 20 years.
Thank you. I would like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to have this civilized debate that we had today. It went better than I expected. Now I would like to open the floor up to the audience. Do you have any questions or thoughts over this discussion we had? Please, use the mic over here.
Okay, I'm going to direct my question to you at the end.
Okay.
You kept saying that Americans, the majority of them, believe in the death penalty. But do you think that means that America should immediately agree with them? Do you think that the people know best?
Well, I believe that since you have majority of death row prisoners are on state death row boards, ultimately each state is responsible for their own sovereignty, and those people are elected and responsible for those representatives and governors. They're responsible to their own citizens. So I don't think all of America can be lumped together in a neat package like that. However, I think that capital punishment will always be supported because of people's instinctual desire to have justice.
But if you also look at polls when it comes to other things like gay marriage, majority of people in America actually do not believe in it, and you can take those in other states. There are states that now allow it, but the people don't. So should we just take away their rights because the people in those states don't agree with it?
I wouldn't lump those two arguments together, because you're talking about, ultimately with gay marriage, you're talking about a person's right to socialize and enter into agreements with whomever they choose. Whereas with the death penalty, you're talking to somebody who's forfeited their right to accept the judgment of the state upon them. So I don't see how the two are related. I understand that, yes, Americans may feel a certain way, but I think it's in two different arenas of the political spectrum. It's in two different parts of people's mind. So maybe I don't understand the questions, but that's how I would answer
Yeah,
that.
I think she was saying like comparing the two, like not comparing
not
gay
like
marriage
actually
to,
comparing
she's
them.
comparing the
The
fact
actual
that
polls.
yes, the polls, how you said more people are against gay marriage, but it's still happening. If the fact that more people are for or against capital punishment, like should the state be able to just say we don't care about what the people think, we're just going to go on with what is right?
Well, I think that the United States government has been founded on giving people more rights. However, it's never been something where we give more rights to people who forfeited their rights. I think that the Supreme Court has said in so many ways with the gay marriage decision, and I don't want to get off track, but this is how we're going to handle this. This is what's right, because we can't divorce people from their unalienable rights. Nobody has said that as of yet, I have not heard a Supreme Court case that said that a person convicted of murder has an unalienable right to live.
Any other questions?
This question is for you. You say you support the death penalty and you forever will.
Right.
So my question to you is, those who commit murder and they're murdered, those who actually participate in the execution, what does that make them?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is brings into a controversial, what do you want to say, job.
Yeah.
But I mean, somebody has to do it ultimately. So you might not be proud to go home and tell your kids that I'm the executioner, but ultimately there has to be somebody there that has the authority, the ability, and just, I guess, the integrity to be able to do that and live with it. But
Does that then make them a murderer?
It does. Murder is murder. No one has the right to take away another person's life. That's the same reason why those who commit murder are being murdered.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I just feel like when they forfeit their rights when they plead guilty to it, so they no longer have the right. I don't know.
Does that make them not people anymore? When they give away those rights, do they stop being people? So does it not become murder?
No, it's not.
Is it like killing an animal, like in a slaughterhouse?
I guess it's a good example, but it's not necessarily like they lose their rights to be a person. It's more or less they knew the consequence. It's not like we're hiding consequences behind a blind and just randomly choosing one. If you murder somebody, the consequence is you deserve to die as well. Mm-hmm. So it's ultimately just going down to the foundation of what you know, and you kind of just sticking to your hammer. That's how I feel. It's my opinion.
That's your opinion, but at the end of the day, murder is murder. If you murder somebody and somebody else murder you because of murder, it doesn't make you any better than the murderer. You're just saying it's okay to murder, but because I have higher power than you, I can murder you and
Right.
I'll get away with it.
It's more of a...
It's not justice.
But that's what somebody in that position would trying to support, is that they're trying to close the circle for the family and ultimately say, this person has harmed your family, but we did everything we can to prevent them from hurting anybody else. It's just justifying it. I hate to use that word that I'm trying to explain, but it's justifying the action. I feel like the action itself of death is justified.
It's not. That's not the only way to prevent murders from happening. Life imprisonment, there's no way, if somebody is given life imprisonment, there is no way they can go outside in the public to harm someone else.
But they could still potentially harm a prison guard or anybody else in prison. So ultimately, would you just say that we shouldn't be caring about, once they're in there, they're, I don't know.
You can't justify murder with murder. We just need a better method.
We have to work towards it.
I wouldn't call it murder. I would call it this is the end of the line. This is justice. I wouldn't call the person that hangs the person. I would call them the hammer of justice.
Okay.
You have to have You have to have somebody that ultimately does that. And whether or not you look at it as murder, I think that's a personal opinion.
It
But
looks
I
like
look
we
at it as
have some
justice.
other questions in the audience. Sir, would you like to go ahead? Yeah, come up, please.
Nice question.
Thank you.
You guys talking about like morality of the death penalty. I have a quick question about like just the economics of the death penalty. What's the relative cost between like just keeping somebody alive and with a life sentence as opposed to just having them sit on death row and killing someone?
Well, I can say that Texas, on average, spends $2.3 million per death penalty case. That's just the case alone. That's not even taking into account how long they actually are held before their execution, and the cost of any of the drugs used to kill them. So I don't know the cost of the death penalty drugs offhand.
I know it's another million.
So would it be fair
The
to
cost
say
is,
that
the cost
it's
is higher for
to
the cost-
enforce the
to enforce the death penalty than it is to keep a person in prison.
That's
on average.
Yes, and that was why I
Okay,
tried to
across
make the
the board.
connection for you guys as to compare the cost of the death penalty as you do for insurance. You pay extra for it, but ultimately you pay to insure yourself no further crime is committed, and you receive a peace of mind and comfort.
So would it be like
Like
a,
what, the 61% in
fairly
this room?
balanced?
What's that?
Would it be fairly balanced? Like it doesn't cost either or? Or does it cost more to put somebody to death, or does it cost?
Correct. It costs more to put somebody to death than it is
Okay.
to keep them in life imprisonment. But that's not including what if they were arrested at age 18 and they lived till they're 90. You know, it's taking the average age arrested at, I believe, 24 or 25 and living till 59, I believe. So, I mean, generally saying, yes, it's more expensive for the death penalty, but there's always circumstances behind.
Okay, so with those numbers, like if they're living like longer, they're living generally the same amount of time on the death row, and it costs more to keep them on the death row before they get put to death. Then,
what was that?
Would the people be put to say they're sitting on death row for like 20, 25 years,
right?
And it costs more to sit there. Wouldn't it be the same to just have them stay on life, just life in prison? If it costs more for them to sit in death row, economically, it's costing taxpayers more money just to have them for
You
a
just move them
revenge
over
thing,
to
which is
life
what I'm getting
without
out of this.
parole. Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying it seems like it would cost less to just give them life in prison.
I think some
Just
things
for
you
somebody's
can't measure in
personal
money.
vendetta.
Thank you.
Closure, and justice. I think are things that are so abstract that you know it when you see it, but you maybe can't put it on a ledger.
Yeah, can't put a value to it.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for coming today and listening to our debate. And thank you to my panelists. Everyone have a
Thank
good
you.
night.
Yeah, we definitely didn't get the